Allan Pease is Australia's most successful author, writing 18 top 10 bestsellers, including 10 number ones. His books are translated into 55 languages and have sold over 30 million copies. Books include The Definitive Book of Body Language, Why Men Don't Listen, and Women Can't Read Maps. Allan, thanks for joining us today.
No, my pleasure. 11 number ones. We just hit number one in Japan with our latest book, so it's getting better.
Excellent. So let's start this from the ground and we'll move up. How do you become an expert in body language?
Well, it's an interesting story for me, Jesse. It started back in the 1950s. When I was a kid at school in the 50s, my father was the southwestern Victorian insurance agent for the Eagle Star Insurance Company. And what the insurance agents did back in those days is that they would collect the premiums. They'd go door to door and pick up the premiums every month, every quarter or half year. And that was how they prospected for new business. So they'd try to meet new members of the family, you'd try to get to meet the neighbours. That was their prime prospecting method. And because it was mostly men calling, knocking on doors, and no women answering, it was very difficult to get a hearing and to get inside. So my father would take me when I was 5 years of age, 3 or 4 nights a week. So I was like a stage prop, I guess, a sales prop. And because if you're a guy with a small kid, you always get invited in for a cup of tea. And if they didn't invite him in, he'd say things like, well, would you mind if Allan uses your toilet, or could he have a glass of water, please? I spent 3 or 4 nights a week peeing in toilets and drinking glasses of water.
Right.
But the great thing about it, I got to sit around the negotiating table with my dad, and he'd tell me in advance what he was going to do. And the insurance agents of the days in the 50s were trained how to sell, and these are the cutting-edge salespeople of the day. They were trained on 75 LP records with Earl Nightingale and Dale Carnegie and all these old guys. So I got to sit around, see all this stuff in action, and my dad would tell me, look, if the premium's too high, they might sit back a bit and maybe cross their arms, put their hand over their mouth, and he'd say, when you see these things, give me a wink so I know. So he's trying to keep me entertained. So I spent 3 or 4 nights a week watching this, and I thought this was normal. I thought everybody could look at other people and start to figure out what was going on. And the result of that was, when I was 25 in 1976, I published a book that I called Body Language, and that went number one worldwide into television, and that's where it started.
Okay. So, when you're speaking to your audience or clients, what are the common issues or difficulties that you encounter?
Well, I suppose the toughest thing for most people is that most people are not aware, they know that first impressions are important when you're meeting people, because in that first 4 minutes of meeting somebody, especially for the first time, they form up to 90% of their impression about you. In fact, most of it's made in the first 10 seconds, and they spend 3 minutes, 50 seconds confirming what they think they've seen. And whether they make a correct impression of you or not, Jesse, doesn't matter. They make that impression, and then they behave towards you as though that was true. So if there's something about you might have a bit of spinach in your teeth, or some strange gesture or movement or eye contact. It doesn't matter why you do it, they're going to pick this up, and if it's detrimental, they're going to judge you detrimentally, sadly. And so most people kind of know first impressions are important, but they don't know why. And the reason why is that if you think back to all the people that you've ever met, you always remember the first time. You don't remember the 5th time or the 12th time or the 22nd time, but you always remember the first time. And there's a biological reason for that, that the limbic part of the brain, the ancient reptilian part, when you meet a brand new person, stranger, it opens, and it's searching them for clues of aggressiveness or friendliness. So your brain's saying, will this person attack me, or will they be my friend? And that's why you always remember those first impressions. Second, third, and fourth time you meet the person, the limbic brain doesn't come into operation, so because you've already done it the first time. And if you don't get that first impression right, then it can be very detrimental to getting on with people, because in all forms of business today, if people buy you, that is, they like you, feel comfortable with you, they feel like you're not threatening, that you accept them, that you understand them, if they buy you, they're likely to buy whatever goes with you. And at top-level business everywhere, and in somewhere like sales and marketing, this is painfully clear, it's all about people first. If they like you, they're likely to give you a fair hearing or get a yes. But if they don't like you, people are going to fight against you, even if it's a good idea. And so the hardest thing for most people is, what should they do in that first 4 minutes to create an atmosphere that's conducive to getting people to feel comfortable to hopefully say yes. And that seems to be a fairly big area of topic in recent times, because people, as I said, have finally become aware of the fact that if you screw the first 4 minutes up, you're going to struggle to get somebody on side and to get a yes.
Now, you're touching on this a lot, but can you break it down and explain the impact of body language in business then?
Well, in business, in fact, in any face-to-face encounter, it's exactly the same percentages, but in business it's critical, because in business you've got business, money, profits hanging on the end of whether you get this right or not. Now, we know that 60 to 80% of all impact made between people in a face-to-face encounter in a business transaction, or a personal one as well, but in a business transaction specifically, 60 to 80% of all the impact of the message is done non-verbally. That is, things that don't involve sounds, words, tone of voice. So what you actually said, that is things we can write on a sheet of paper, that's how we define a word. If you can write it down, then it qualifies as a word. So even things like, oh, well, yeah, oh, no, ho, ho, they can be written down. So we classify those as words for the point of this research. But those things only account for between 7 to 10% of the impact. So what you actually said, Jesse, doesn't have that much impact on how the person perceives you. 60 to 80% is the way you look, appear, and behave, and the rest is tone of voice. So it's far more important that you look the right way and present the right way. And think about this, well-versed politicians and CEOs all understand this, and they go to classes specifically to learn how to make a best impression when you're on a big stage in front of a large audience that you want to persuade, or if you're going on television where you want to get people to say yes, vote for you, or go along with what your cause is. And so, and most, as we said before, is done in the first 4 minutes. And so that's the toughest call for most people at any executive level. And a lot of executives, you see this with politicians too, I see this all the time, they think, no, look, I won't bother with learning how to do that. I'll just go ahead and I'll do it and I'll be myself. Now, look, the worst advice you can give some people is just be yourself. Think of some of the people that you know. If you said to them, you go to this encounter, just be yourself, and that's the worst possible thing you could have said to them.
You're not wrong. So I'll ask you then, in an environment, in today's environment where more business is done remote locations, how does this translate when we're doing business over the phone, similar to the way that you and I are speaking now?
Well, that's difficult because on the phone, all you've got is two mediums. You've got tone of voice and you've got words. And tone of voice carries far more impact, 3 to 4 times more impact than the words. Again, the way you said it is far more important than what you actually said. In fact, if you learn how to say things in a certain way, you can tell people to go to hell in such a way they begin to look forward to the trip. That's how powerful it is. But what's happening more and more now and in the future is we're coming now onto FaceTime, onto Skype, where we're actually seeing people again. And it's been happening in the last 4 or 5 years, and it will continue in the future. And the reason that this is important is twofold. First, you're back into the visual area again of doing business. But it's even more important than when you're face-to-face, because if you're looking at somebody on a Skype screen or on FaceTime, for example, you can stare at that person and you can analyse every part of their face and their expressions, which if you were face-to-face in real life, you couldn't do that because they'd think that you were staring them out. Yet on a Skype screen, you can do that. You can look you can look at every single movement, and you've normally only got from the chest to the head. You've only got the upper part of their body to do this with, which means you're being more critical and scrutinising more and more detailed because of the fact that you can do it on the screen. And so now body language is becoming even more critical if you're going to do business in a Skype environment or in any sort of environment where you've got a typical example is executive meetings now can be held online where you might have 4 or 5, 6 people in the one cyber room, but you're all on the same screen as though you were there face to face. And the only difference is now you can analyse each person by staring at them, which you wouldn't dare do if you're actually face to face.
That's an interesting point. And so when you talk about these sorts of issues, how does body language differ if you're dealing with someone who has a different tone or posture to you? Do you still look to appear strong, or do you mirror a weaker partner? How would you sort of balance these issues?
Well, first you've got to decide what outcome do you want to have with this person. So, for example, if you wanted to be convincing, persuasive, or consoling, or counselling, where they need to feel that you're not above them and potentially intimidating, you also don't want to show that you're below them because they may not listen to you or give you any credibility. So you want to be on what you might call the same level. Now, the same level means that your eyes are at the same level, which means if you get a tall person and a short person who need to negotiate or to sit together, you're better to sit. And if you've got an office with adjustable chairs, you have chairs at different heights. And so you sit the shorter person in the taller chair and the taller person in the shorter chair. That has the effect of getting everybody's eyes at roughly the same level. So when you say we're talking on the same level, that's in fact what it is. And you can create that, which makes people feel very comfortable because if you're a shorter person and you're dealing with a taller person, all shorter people know that taller people are exerting an animal pressure. And oftentimes taller people are not aware that they do that they're actually subtly intimidating shorter people. And so by adjusting chair levels and getting people to the same eye level height, you can account for that. Now, body language is an outward reflection of your emotions. So whatever emotion you're feeling, so happiness, sadness, guilt, confidence, superiority, submission, whatever you're feeling emotionally is likely to be displayed or reflected in a gesture, a posture, a movement, expression, and so on. So the art of reading body language is simply reading a person's emotional condition. You then match it up with what they're saying in the circumstances under which it's all happening. And that allows you, when you become good at this, Jesse, to piece together what could be going through their mind. So in simple terms, that's how it works. And women generally are 2 to 3 times better at doing this without any training than men are. And the reason for that is having babies. Human babies don't talk or do anything for the first 2 years. And so female brains have wired parts of it to be able to read the non-verbal signals of babies, to work out the condition of the baby. Is it tired, frightened, hungry, in pain, and so on, which in evolutionary terms, men, we never needed to learn how to do that stuff. If you're hitting a moving bison with a large rock, you're not saying, gee, I wonder how it's feeling about all this. You've just got to hit it accurately. If you hit it accurately, everybody cheers and you're a hero for the day. And so the result of that is that women in business are far more perceptive at reading nonverbal situations than men. And this is also the reason for any man who's listening to this program as to why, if you've had any experience with women, if a woman knows you well, it's very difficult to lie to her face. I mean, let me ask you the question, Jesse. How successfully can you lie to a woman's face if she knows you well? Even a small lie. Can you get away with it?
I'm not very good at it, no matter
well,
who
most
it is,
of us
most
are.
of the time.
And guys who say they're good at it are good at that. Either she's letting him feel that way or he's a klutz.
Yes.
He thinks he's getting away with it, but he's not. And for this reason, one of the things we teach men at all levels is don't lie to women to their face, because your chances of getting away with that are not really high. Never lie to their face. You call them up or send an SMS. Don't front up. So, because body language is an outward reflection of emotions, if you're with all your friends or your buddies or people that you like, your peers, people you feel confident with, one of the interesting phenomena that happens is what's called mirroring. You all start using the same gestures, movements, expressions, tone of voice, because as long as you're all agreeing on the same subjects and feel the same way, you will be physically reflecting them as well as verbally and mentally reflecting them. And this is also a very powerful strategy if you want to warm people up, who you've just met, is to, by intentionally mirroring other people, mirroring everything except negative gestures, but everything else by copying it subtly. After 3 or 4 minutes of that, they get a feeling there's something about you they like, Jesse. They don't know what it is, can't put their finger on it, but, you know, when we first met, I just felt comfortable with you. I felt good. And the bottom line is you have created that by mirroring the person intentionally. Now, when you're with people you don't like, which is where you started with this question, or people that you don't get on with, or people that you maybe don't have a high opinion of, your brain intentionally makes a point of not mirroring them. It's a bit like when you get in an elevator with strangers. You don't mirror people. Like, you want to upset somebody, get into an elevator with one person, stand next to that person, and mirror them, see what happens. They get really, really agitated about the fact that you're mirroring a stranger in a public place.
And so some people tend to just naturally have poor posture, whether it's, rolled shoulders or keeping their head down, which can be assumed to be negative. But if you're dealing with someone like that, and they start to feel that, will they naturally open up, or should you be mirroring that posture in order to get on the same level as them?
Well, you can. That's right. If somebody's got almost like a hangdog expression in their whole body, if you intentionally mirror that with your eyes at the same level, which means if you're taller, you need to stoop a little bit or sit on a chair to try and level up the height. You try that for a little while and just see if it gets them to open up. And oftentimes it will get them to open up. If it doesn't, you need to try something else, because mirroring negatives is a very difficult thing for creating rapport. Normally you'd mirror the positives of a person, because that means when they're looking at you, they're seeing their positive attributes and attitudes reflected in you. If someone is more hangdog and you mirror that, it can work, but if it's not working after 3 or 4 minutes, if you don't feel like you're getting through or creating a connection or getting rapport, you're better off to change it.
Does that create an issue initially if you've not had contact with them, though, where they're quite intimidated and shy initially? Do you not come across a little bit perhaps overly dominant if you approach the situation in that manner initially?
Well, what's likely to happen in a business encounter is the first physical point of contact is going to be a handshake in most cases. If they're Westerners or had exposure to the West, and I'm excluding largely Asian people here and Japanese, because handshaking is not necessarily the norm in those regions. They might have other ways of greeting, such as bowing or using a Y, but if they had exposure to doing business with Westerners, they're likely to do a handshake. But if you go to Japan, for example, which I was last week, when Mr. Ikimoto gives you his handshake, he might be a powerful executive with a big company, but he gives you 4 breakfast sausages. And you've got all of these squashy things that are going all over the place. Now, if you're raised in a Western or Western European country, a soft handshake is unconsciously, and not necessarily correctly, but unconsciously connected with soft personality, that this guy must be a bit of a wimp because you've got this dead handshake. Yet in Japan, he might be the most powerful guy in the company. You also find, generally speaking, in Asia, that Asian people will give a soft handshake because many of them have never had experience with handshaking, Jesse. They've seen it on the TV. They've seen it on American movies. They know how it's done, but they've never necessarily had experience on how to do it, so they're likely to give you a dead salmon. And so the key to creating rapport with a handshake is twofold. First, that you keep your palm absolutely straight, that is vertical to the ground, not with the palm facing down, which is perceived and felt as you're being aggressive or coming on heavy, or with the palm facing upwards, it's like you're submissive. It's like you'd only have the palm up if you're trying to apologise about something that you screwed up. But you keep the palm straight. And the second part, which is the key here, is to give the same pressure that you receive. Now, on a scale of 1 to 10 of strength, 10 is a knuckle grinder. That's a very strong grip. 1 is a piece of jelly. On a scale of 1 to 10, my default position, and everybody has a default position, is about a 7. So if I meet you and we shake hands, if yours is a 7, instantly we'll feel a connection because we've got the same pressure and the palms remain straight. What if you've got a 4 in the handshake because you're a plastic surgeon? Plastic surgeon will give you, he doesn't want to shake hands or she doesn't want to shake hands. That's their tools of trade, as it is with artists and musicians. They don't want to shake hands, but if you reach first and force them into it, they're likely to give you a dead fish. And you might make a misinterpretation on this. And so if you give me a 4 and I give you a 7, I'm putting 30% more pressure into the handshake at the opening point of the interview, of that face-to-face encounter. And you're, at a gut level, going to think, hey, this guy's coming on a bit strong. So therefore you stand back further and you're likely to watch me to see what I'm going to do next because I gave you a dominant handshake. So if I want to create rapport with you, if you present me with a 4, I'll give you a 4 back, which to me doesn't feel right, but I know that feels right for you. So by giving you a 4 back, you start to think, I like this guy. The minute I met him, the vibes were good. Now, there's no vibes, there's no chemistry. That's just stuff you read in magazines. There are exact things happening when you meet people that create reflections and attitudes about the other person. So you match the same pressure received. So if I meet somebody with a 9, for example, like a knuckle grinder, I've got to pick up 20%, or that person's going to think I'm a bit soft, a bit wimpy. And where I need to create rapport and get them on side, and maybe convince them to do something, a 7's not going to do me much justice with someone who comes on with a 9. So match the pressure, keep the palm straight. And right at the outset, people will feel some sort of connection with you.
This leads directly into my next question when you've talked about sort of different cultures. And what I wanted to ask is, in business, we often hear about the difference in sales techniques between countries and continents, so between Australia to North America to Europe. When you're doing this, are there similar changes in body language when it's clear that you're in a different geography or dealing with very different audiences?
Yes, absolutely, but it's becoming less and less as time goes on. With older generations of most other cultures, there normally are a group of specific gestures or movements or body language behaviours within that particular country, and they've been there for probably thousands of years. We know that through looking at art, and particularly wall art. You can see how people use gestures and body language like frozen pictures from the past. So we know that some things haven't changed in hundreds, even thousands of years, maybe hundreds of thousands of years. That's the possibility of that. But they're all disappearing. So if you get younger generations, say the under 30s, millennials and Gen Ys, worldwide, their behaviour, body language and customs will be pretty much the same now. And the reason for that's interesting. They're the first generation raised watching Netflix, watching American TV and American movies. All video games are produced and made by the Americans. They might be filmed someplace else, but they've all got American body language in there. Everything is the USA. And so as a result of that, we took a film about 3 years ago of 10 and 12-year-old kids interacting in Russia when I was in Siberia. I go to Siberia several months of the year, in various countries in Europe, in the United Kingdom, in the United States, in Iceland and South Africa. And when you play the film back with the sound off, if there are no distinguishing clothing things these kids are wearing, you cannot tell where they're from. You don't know whether they're English, Americans, Germans, French, because they're all behaving in the same way. And they've got this from video games and from television. But if you look at their grandparents, if you film their grandparents, which we also did, you will see a lot of cultural differences in things in terms of how they're behaving, which have come from their parents and from their parents, and it's all historically handed down. Most body language is historically handed down in a culture. But those cultural differences now are completely disappearing. So I predict within one generation from now, Jesse, that body language will be pretty much the same language everywhere. But in the meantime, when we're in this hybrid stage, the key is very simple. If you go to another country, and in the last 7 days, I've been to 7 countries, and the thing I do in every country when I go there, even though I know most cultures pretty well, I say to my host, show me what is the normal greeting and farewell signals here, for example. So when I was in Kazakhstan, for example, 2 days ago, that's a big country, hangs off the bottom of Russia. In a business environment, all men shake hands, but women don't. Now, if you go to Germany, men and women both shake hands. Now, in Germany, they'll give you 1, 2 pumps and the whole for 3, then release. Whereas in France, they'll shake your hand maybe 2 or 3 times every day. They'll shake your hand when they see you, when they say goodbye, when they meet you again, when you make a good point. They're just shaking your hand all day. Men and women both do this. But in Kazakhstan, women don't shake hands. And I made the error of, I came from Germany. I made the error of not saying to my local host there, just demonstrate for me. And it's what you've got to do. You ask, please demonstrate how you say hello, how you say goodbye. And it wasn't that until I was reaching for women's hands that they looked a little bit shocked. And these were powerful businessmen women. They saw my hand coming and they kind of half expected it but didn't know what to do. So I asked the host, how do you say goodbye? How do you say hello? How do you greet people? How do you thank people? What are some of the things you should or shouldn't do? And importantly, what are the rudest, most insulting gestures you can make? And get them to give you a demonstration of that. Because you will be surprised, shocked, horrified, Jesse, the things like what you as an American and I as an Australian might use the OK signal, which is where the index finger presses to make a ring against the thumb. Now, that's got 17 meanings, depends where you come from. If you use it in Japan, it means money. It's a shape of coins. If you use it in Southern Europe, like France, for example, it means 0. It means naught. Yet for you and I, it means spot on. Yet in Turkey and Greece, it's a rude insult. It's a sexual insult. Right. They're calling you an a-hole. Those countries, so you go to Greece and tell them they're really nice people using OK, and they ask you to leave.
Fair enough. Okay.
So ask the host what you should do. And I'm serious about this rude. I've seen so many Westerners make dreadful mistakes by using OK signals and the thumb up signal, which usually means pretty good for Westerners, but in some places like northern Greece, it means go and get stuffed.
So I'll ask you in a moment about how you've taken this experience and run it through Pease International. But firstly, when you're running your programs, and as you've alluded to, you are doing these across the globe, how do you tailor these to your audiences and your market to ensure that they're getting value and that they can use this in a business sense?
Well, the basic body language signals, the basic emotions, and there are about 11 human emotions that are shared by virtually all cultures, including 3 lost cultures that were discovered in the highlands of New Guinea, the Botswana Bushmen, the Titicaca's in South America. These are cultures that really have never seen another culture of black or white since eternity, and they're interesting cultures because they behave with rituals and behaviours the way they did hundreds, even thousands of years ago. And they're interesting to look at because they give us a fairly good indication where some of these things that we did come from. But the basic body language is the same in most countries. So that's because it's linked to emotions. It's an outward reflection of your emotions. So all cultures experience sadness, happiness, pride, confidence, joy, fear the same way. And as a result, use the same gestures for those emotions. So the basics are the same everywhere. What can change is cultural rituals, things such as greeting, the amount of eye contact you might have with somebody, which is critical, and how far away you'll stand from somebody at distance. So in Japan, where I was the other day, these guys will stand 30 centimetres away from me when we're talking. Now, I'm a 46 centimetre guy from Sydney. Yes. Big cities, we have a bubble around 46 centimetres, and the further out into country areas you get, the bigger the bubble gets. So if you get out into central Australia, for example, in a place like Bathurst or Dubbo or Tamworth, which I was recently, people stand further back because they might have, rather than having 46 centimetres, they might have 60 centimetres of space. So as a result, they're standing 1.2 metres from a stranger when they meet them. And if you're from the city, you feel a little bit distant and left out. And so if you're not aware of what's happening, you might just shuffle forward to make yourself feel comfortable. And you step into the other guy's space and he thinks he's coming on to me now, and he starts walking backwards, and suddenly you're back on the guy around the room. Now in Japan, they have around 30 centimetres, which for me, I'm aware of that. But I'm still aware of the fact that this guy is standing in my face, is how I would describe it. Because if it was in Australia or America, that guy would be standing in my face. But there it's perfectly normal. Now, if you're not aware of that, you're likely to start backing up, and suddenly you're going around the room. In fact, at an international conference some years ago, we had a camera on the roof and we filmed Australian, American, and Japanese at a big conference. And the Japanese were backing the Aussies and the Americans around the room. So we sped it up and it looked like a waltz going around the room with the Japanese leading. So the difference there is that when you meet somebody, if they step back and you find you step forward, they step back again, it tells you you've got to hold your ground and stay there. So the basic cultural differences are the same in emotions everywhere. So what changes is distance that you'll stand away, amount of eye contact, the amount of touch frequency you can have or not. So in Britain, you just don't touch anybody, particularly male touching male. Whereas in France, they're all over you like a cheap suit. Like, there you are, you're an Englishman or most Aussies and many Americans, and suddenly this Greek or Italian or French guy is all over you, and he might even give you a kiss, and you completely forgot what the hell you were talking about. Now, if you expect this to happen, you know it's part of the culture. In fact, when I'm in France, for example, they're always hanging on to me. They put their arm around me, and guys have a few drinks, they start to kiss me. These are executives. And I run with it because I know that that's a sign of endearment. And if I don't do it back, they're going to think Allan doesn't like me. And if Allan doesn't like me, they're not likely to do business with me.
Very good. Okay. So there's not a lot of, I guess, there's common trends within perhaps geographical areas, but really you're required to translate and adapt your programs depending upon, which nation you are in the world then. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, pretty much. Overall, you could say that around 85% of what I teach in business skills in every country, and I'm in 55 languages, so I've been to about 160 countries, and about 80 to 85% of the basics are the same everywhere. If there's a cultural difference because of where it is, I'll learn those, and cultural difference is the most marked in Arabic countries. For example, if you go to Saudi Arabia, where I go, or not so much Dubai now, because that's become a fairly westernised type place in terms of body language. But if you go to Abu Dhabi, it's very traditional there. Saudi Arabia, very traditional as well. And so there are big differences in what things mean when you go to these places, as there still are in Japan and Korea. So Japan, Korea, the Middle East, and China would be the next. Those particular regions do have some particular peculiarities. But look, all you've got to do is ask your local host when you're there to show you how you say hello, how you say goodbye, how much touch should you have, and observe other people to see what they're doing, and mirror, copy it. That makes them feel comfortable about it, because if you don't mirror, if you're in a touching country like France and you don't touch back, they're going to think you don't like them, and therefore they're not feeling predisposed to want to say yes to you.
Okay, so, you've demonstrated how you're running these in different countries. Can you take us through, how the programs and services that are now run through Pease International and what your schedule is like?
Well, yeah, in terms of what we do, the overall encompassing umbrella of what our books are about is communication skills, human communication skills. So the 18 bestsellers that we've got, there's 4 of those are on male and female communication. So if you've got to convince, persuade, motivate, deal with, or live with the opposite sex, how do you do it? Because they perceive things in very different ways. Even though it's politically correct to go around pretending to each other that men and women want the same things, if you've had any experience with men and women, that just is not true. That's a sad lie. That we have different ways of seeing things, not better or worse, but different. And the reason that those inequalities come about with convincing men and women of the opposite sex is because the people who promote the politically correct stuff confuse difference with science. Now, equality, for example, is a political precept. Equality means the same background, skills, education, abilities. You can do anything you want regardless of which sex you are, male or female, or the third sex. You can do whatever you like. But science, which is difference, is a totally different thing. That means, as men and women, do we perceive the world the same way? Do we want exactly the same things? And the answer is clear: no, we don't. We don't have the same perception. We don't see things the same way. For example, if you just said to a woman who knows you well, perhaps your wife or lady friend or girlfriend, look, I'm just going to go out with my friends to have a few drinks, and she says, fine, go ahead, Jesse. What does that mean to you?
I'm staying in tonight, aren't I?
That means if you do, you are in serious trouble. You would be punished. Now, if you said to me, Alan, I'm going to go and see a few of my friends and have a few drinks, I'd say, fine, go ahead, Jesse. If I said the same thing, you know that I'm going along with you. I'm congratulating you. I'm, in fact, encouraging you. If a woman says that, means you will die at the first possible opportunity. So
it does.
We've said the same thing, but it means totally different things. And male and female brains perceive the world differently. So there's 4 of our books deal with that. There are 3 that deal with body language. When you're face-to-face, to be able to assess from a person when you're looking at them, are they with you? Are they against you? Are they lying? Are they telling the truth? Are they holding back information? Are they skeptical? Are they positive? Because women, as I said earlier, have a more natural affinity to do this. They call it gut feeling. They call it intuition. Oh, my intuition says, Jesse, you can't believe that guy. And normally when a woman says that, I mean, they're pretty right. There's rare that when they say that with confidence that they're wrong, because they picked up body language gestures that are contradicting what that person's saying, and therefore they don't trust them or believe them. Whereas guys, it's much easier to fool guys face to face. It's very difficult with women. You've got to fool them. You're going to fool them. You do it in an email or over the phone. You don't go face to face. So we deal with everything with human communication. Our latest project and book is called The Answer, which deals with the part of the brain that drives success, that determines how successful you will or won't be, and pulls together all the concepts that you've ever heard about: goal setting, about the universe, the law of attraction is now the in buzzword for that same thing, praying to your God to get results. What we've done is found a part of the brain that all those things are dealing with. So it doesn't matter what you call it, it's the same part of the brain that drives success or failure. And so overall, that's human communication skills is what we do, which started for me, as I mentioned before, back in the 50s, sitting around the table with my dad with a full bladder of water, listening to him negotiate for insurance premiums. And how we apply it is, we do it a number of ways. I personally speak at about 60 or so conferences a year, and most of those are in the Northern Hemisphere, and about half of those are in Russian-speaking countries, Siberia and mainland Russia and Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, and wherever they speak Russian, Moldova, Ukraine. And we run weekends here in our resort property in Australia 3 times a year. We get maximum 30 people to come and live with us for the weekend, Saturday and Sunday, and we teach them how to work out what they should be doing with their life on the first day, and how to actually find what you need to be waking up to say, yes, this is what I want to do with my life, how to discover it, and how to go and get it. And on the second day, we talk about how to win people over, which covers body language skills and convincing the opposite sex and making best impressions. And they're very popular because everybody in every language needs to know these things. We know we need to know them. And when you apply these things, when you've learned them, you put them into business and into your personal life, and you see the results, the hardest thing is not to laugh when you see somebody responding positively because of something you just did.
Yes. Okay. And, I mean, you've already touched on this a little bit, but because you've been in the industry for decades, are there any sort of trends or particular changes that you've seen over this period of time?
I think that, you mean in business? Well, a number of things. First, as I mentioned earlier, body language is changing. The cultural differences are disappearing because even in the most remote parts of Siberia, where I was recently, I watched a couple of kids cut a hole in the ice. They were fishing, and that image has been around for hundreds of years of Siberian kids fishing through a hole in the ice. Yet they were wearing baseball caps backwards, and they were using American gestures. They're only maybe 14 or 15 years of age. And so if you didn't know who they were or what they're doing, you might think they're in fact Americans. So body language is changing to become more one language, and it'll be American language. The upside of that is that, whichever country you go to in the future, particularly the next generation, and it's happening now, that you'll be able to more understand what they're thinking, what they're projecting, because they're using the same gestures, which make up 60 to 80% of all the impact. And that's the most noticeable thing that's happening right now, that things are disappearing. In terms of subjects, if you go back 40 years ago, making first impressions was not a big thing on people's agendas, whereas today it is, because now people understand in training that business is about people convincing other people, whether you're at the ground face sales level or at retail, or whether you're an executive where you've got to persuade people as a leader that people buy you and they feel comfortable with you, they'll feel motivated and persuaded to want to follow you and say yes. And that's now become probably the number one subject in the world. And what I speak on is what customers, clients and those want, and what they're demanding is face-to-face encounter skills, first impressions, and reading other people's body language and putting your own across and coming across well. They would be the top three things that people demand. I wish they'd ask me to talk about something else because they keep asking for the same things. But that's where the market trend has gone now for what companies want in training, which 30, 40 years ago, they wanted direct sales skills.
We're getting towards the end of our conversation. So for our last question, I'd like to ask you, is there a particular encounter or lesson from a personality that you'd like to share with us?
Yeah, when I think back of all the personalities I've met, because I meet them at big conferences worldwide, and in fact I just spent 2 days with Mike Tyson watching him speak and communicate in Kazakhstan, which was a really interesting event. But the one that would stand out for me would be Angela Merkel when she first became the Chancellor of Germany. And I was at a big conference, it was a Rotary conference, and she was going to open the Rotary conference. I was the first speaker. And I was watching her backstage behind the curtains, and she was pacing back and forth. She had small notes on cards, and she's reading the notes, and she's clearly practicing, and she was clearly under stress. And it hit me that Angela Merkel was nervous in front of a crowd. And when she went out behind the curtains, out in front of the lectern, it was clear that she really was trying to pull herself together. And many people would sort of have difficulty getting in their head around the fact that the Chancellor of Germany, the most powerful woman in the world, could be nervous in front of a crowd. But the bottom line is, Jesse, she's human. And the number one fear in most countries in the world for most people is standing in front of a group of your peers and giving a speech. And it's in front of your peers. 100,000 strangers is relatively easy compared to giving a speech at a wedding of your daughter, which everybody's critical about you. But she was clearly nervous. And she inherited a gesture, was trained to use a gesture. I'll let you guess who that might have come from. What's called the steeple. Now, the steeple is it's a gesture that's almost like praying in front of your body, where the fingertips of one hand just touch lightly on the fingertips of the other hand. So it's called a steeple. Now, if you guys who are listening to this program now, if you just try that, just do this steeple. Just hold one hand, the fingertips touching the other hand, like praying in front of your body. And when you do this, the word that goes with this is confidence. As you start to do it, you start to feel within 2 minutes like you've got it all under control, that you are pulling yourself together, that your emotions are good. And importantly, what we found with photographic tests, of people who have been mirroring it, we show those images to people who've got to make an assessment. What's this person like? What's their attitude like? What's their trustworthiness like? And we give them a list of adjectives to tick to describe what the person would be like if they met them. That when we introduce the mirroring gesture into it, the word confidence and authority and self-control start getting ticked in the adjective list. So what it means is that when people see you steepling, Jesse, they start to think that you seem to know what you're doing. You obviously know what you're talking about. So it works both ways, that it makes you feel good that you're pulling yourself together. Importantly, other people think you seem to know what you're doing. And when you look at Angela Merkel now, in fact, the first 10 years of her chancellorship, she put that into her repertoire, and every time she comes out of stage, she puts a steeple position together, and she says, "Min Herren und Damen." And when you see her do this, you say, wow, this woman's really got it together. Yet, chances are she was terrified behind the stage 2 minutes ago. So what it means is you can manipulate and control your emotions by taking certain body language gestures, because if you take any gesture and hold it for 2 minutes, you will feel the emotions that match it, because the emotions cause the gesture. But if you make the gesture, within 2 minutes, you feel the emotions. So if you're nervous about some meeting you've got to go to face-to-face, by taking on confidence signals, including things like the steeple, and if you Google Angela Merkel, you'll see her doing this everywhere. In fact, she overdid it, and the cartoonist and comedian started to take the mickey out of it, so she had to modify that a little bit. But if you do that, you manipulate it. And every time I see her come out and do this, it makes me laugh. And the same with, I did the first seminars in Russia at the Kremlin at the fall of communism, put on by the deputy mayor of St. Petersburg, who was Vladimir Putin. And Vladimir put on this seminar for the new 300 politicians of Russia. And I talked about steepling and first impressions on television, where you're visible from the waist up. When I see Vladimir Putin on TV today, I still see him use steepling, head nodding, and he always looks at someone's hand when they present it to see whether it's going to be up or sideways. So those two, and they're two very powerful people, just stand out in my mind of two people who know how to take training and will take it on board and make it work for themselves.
Excellent. Allan, it's been very insightful. I appreciate your time today, and I look forward to speaking with you again in future.
It'd be my pleasure, and great talking with you, Jesse.